Welcome to Atlantic Currents, our annual report on wider Atlantic perspectives and patterns. And we're dealing now with the most important, the COVID-19 crisis viewed from the South. We have a very important person with us, Uri Dadush, who will talk to us about crisis, COVID-19, and international trade. And now we go to the first question. Uri, your assessment is equally sober, writing that COVID-19 will leave deep scars on the world economy. Yet you end your paper on a rather positive note. You said COVID-19 has also accelerated innovations in medicine and in information technology that makes us better equipped to deal with the next pandemic. These innovations, you said, will prove of great value in improving the efficiency of the economy and many fields of medicine. On one hand, you are sober, a realistic assessment. At the other hand, you say it all doesn't look that bad. So where are we today?
Well, Helmut, millions of people have died. So we have to be sober. And not only that, we have a huge increase in inequality. The virus has affected different communities, the poorest communities the worst. And we also have a big increase in government debt that we're going to be paying for a long time to come. So this is why the assessment is sober and has to be sober. And we're certainly not out of the woods. Although the arrival of vaccines clearly brings a lot of hope in the countries that right now have access to vaccines, which again are the wealthiest countries. As far as the long-term future is concerned, I do consider that there are some positive aspects that will come out of the crisis. And as you know, crises always offer opportunity, not just terrible problems as we have at the moment. And I highlight three main positives. The first is we've learned to operate the way you and I are talking now. And the way I'm talking with many of my collaborators around the world. And this means that a lot more work will be done remotely and a lot of travel will be avoided. This is an extraordinarily efficient way of doing things. It's not perfect. We still need the human contact. We will have more human contact. But this is a major technological innovation. It's been there for a while. It's not new. But now we've learned how to use it. And, I teach my classes remotely. I write my papers remotely with my co-authors. I work remotely with the organizations I consult for. The second is, this is not a field, I'm not a doctor, but it looks to me like these new biotechnologies that have enabled almost miraculously rapid development of vaccines are going to have applications in many areas. There's a McKinsey report on biotechnology which sees very big improvements in productivity and quality, not only in healthcare, but also in agriculture, in materials, and by the way, in healthcare, not just related to vaccines, but many other areas of treatment, including cancer treatment. So this technology, again, it's not new, but what the pandemic has shown is how far it has gotten and its capacity to accelerate in many areas.
But you,
and the third, which is, sorry, Helmut, just quickly not to be overlooked, is the fact that I think governments have gotten a lot better at relief measures and stimulus measures that are highly targeted to specific segments of society and specific firms than they were before this crisis. Of course, the amount of fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus is completely unprecedented. But it's not only that, it's that it's become much more targeted. And this bodes well for future episodes of crisis.
You are, again, optimistic, and I hope you are right, and I hope your predictions are good, because the governments in the past, looking at Europe and the United States, did not react to the crisis very coherent, very logic, and very constructive. If you look at the vaccination problems in Europe,
absolutely.
Germany, you know, we are sending vehicles to Mars, and perfect to Mars, and we are unable to vaccinate our people. So your optimism I don't share, but then you say the exact nature of the next pandemic is impossible to predict. So if we can't predict, what do you do? Nothing. You have to wait.
You can do things, but you cannot. It is impossible to avoid a disruption that will come with the next pandemic, insofar as the next pandemic will very likely be different than the last one. The next virus will be different than the last one. It's impossible to avoid some element of disruption. And that needs to be recognized. And you know, governments have failed in many ways, but you also have to recognize that they dealt with something completely unprecedented, and it will happen again in a different way. So just recognize that. However, there are things we can do to prepare. Whatever virus pandemic might hit, we will need masks, protective personal equipment. We will need stores of those materials. We can prepare by learning to produce new vaccines, which we are doing with the new technologies, the mRNA technologies that respond to new types of virus. We can teach our institutions to be quicker in evaluating vaccines and approving them than we have been in the past. We can also learn from the mechanisms of this crisis in terms, for example, of investing quickly and in large amounts in order to develop the therapies and the vaccines that are needed when a new virus emerges. The big difference between Europe, the European Union, and countries like the UK, Israel, even the United States, is that they were far faster at recognizing the necessity to get the vaccine and more willing to pay and to invest quickly so as to encourage companies to produce. That's why Europe is behind the rest. So we can establish the financing mechanisms that are needed for developing countries, et cetera, et cetera. We can establish better monitoring mechanisms, early warning systems than we have at the moment, which of course requires more international collaboration.
Now the question then comes, what you say, more international collaboration, which is a beautiful idea. But do you think that the globalization is, and trade and others, is still the future? Hasn't the globalization also put us where we are today? Relying on China, relying on specific producers of protective gear, of vaccines, particularly China, India, and the local activities, production of medicine in in England or in Italy or in Germany have been neglected. So suddenly this world crisis happens and we are not prepared. We have still no vaccines. If you needed some, you won't find them.
Well, of course, in a globalized world, you have pandemics. But a pandemic is, by definition, a global event. This is not new, Helmut. Pandemics go back at least to the early Middle Ages, the Black Death, etc. The only way to avoid this kind of internationalization is to go back not just to the Middle Ages, but as Yuval Harari has said, you have to go back to the Stone Age to avoid this, to avoid the international transmission of disease. As far as your first question, which is this the end of globalization? Is this, or the demise of globalization? Absolutely not. I point to the fact that the solutions to the crisis, to the pandemics, have relied fundamentally on international trade, even though there's been a lot of protectionist and vaccine nationalism. The net result is that there's been a big increase in trade of medical goods since the pandemic struck, which is entirely logical, because not everybody can have everything at home in this very, very complex situation. So countries have become very reliant on international trade, and not only international trade to solve the crisis, but collaboration of researchers across the world. Yeah, the most successful vaccine is a collaboration between a German company and an American company, and there are many other examples.
If you look now at the African countries, for example, if you say it's international, many African countries are heavily reliant on imports from China. Over 75% of the PPE originates in China. China, it seems, is gaining in trade amongst African countries. Could this not lead to a complete reliance on China for future trading in medical products and extend China's political influence in Africa and around the globe?
I think China's influence around the world is on the rise. It was on the rise before the pandemic. It will continue to be on the rise after the pandemic. This has to do with the size of its population and the extraordinary dynamism of its economy, which is unprecedented. As many African countries are heavily reliant on China for PPE, but China is by far not the only producer of medical goods and PPE. These are produced around the world, including in Europe and increasingly in many other developing countries. Yes, the pandemic has been a manifestation of growing Chinese influence. But it isn't the fundamental cause of growing Chinese influence. And I have to say that my own observation is that this Chinese influence is not always a bad thing, like it's described always as a bad thing. After all, the fact that China has been in the lead in giving vaccines at relatively low cost, or sometimes for free, to large numbers of developing countries, that's a good thing. The fact that China has recovered faster than anybody imagined and faster than any other country is having a big impact on commodity prices, which helps countries in Africa. So, you know, you have to take the good with the bad, or the bad with the good. too much influence by a regime that is fundamentally authoritarian and state-driven, but at the same time, many opportunities for growth and many opportunities to buy from China stuff that we really need.
Uri, last question, important, I think also. You say, okay, globalization will continue. Chinese influence is welcome, but it's not the only one nation which has, how do you say, influence. Which organization, let's say WHO, United Nations, NATO, all these international groups, who has in any way the best suited ideas, organizations to follow through with the task of organizing the world in the next crisis, or even continuing this crisis and fight this crisis? Is there an international organization which comes to your mind, or is this the coronavirus nationalism which will accompany us?
So Helmut, you know, I worked for many years in the World Bank. I've been observing multilateral organizations at work for many years. I would make 2 points. Separate the politics from the technical. The first point is that the politics is absolutely fundamental. By that I mean that the real power lies not in Geneva or in 19th Street in Washington. It lies at the White House, in the US Congress, in Beijing, in Brussels, and not even in Brussels very often, but in Paris or Berlin. That's where the real power lies to deal with these sorts of global problems. And unless these capitals are ready to work together, and it's been on and off, sometimes they've worked well together. In recent years, unfortunately, that cooperation has lapsed to a significant degree. So far as they work together, then the multilateral organization can play an absolutely central role in coordinating the effort, helping coordinate the effort, and delivering on the ground. In terms of technical capacity, I mean, to address your question as directly as I can, I would say that there are 2 organizations that spring in my mind as being able to deal with the complexities of a pandemic that has both profound health and economic implications. And one is the World Health Organization. And thankfully, the United States is rejoining the World Health Organization for its technical knowledge. And the World Bank for its capacity to deal with multifaceted development problems, including, by the way, a capacity to deal with health issues. That's one of the specializations within the World Bank, as well as the economic implications. So to me, these are the economic developmental implications. To me, those are the 2 natural organizations to deal and to improve our capacity to deal with the pandemics. But many other organizations play a role. Of course, the IMF is very important in terms of short-term financing and has played a significant role in this crisis. And many other development banks. The United Nations at the political level helps provide a kind of umbrella work. But again, I underscore the point that in the end, it's in the capitals of the big powers that the efficacy of a worldwide response is determined. It's not in the multilateral organizations.
Uri Dadush, thank you very much. Next time we see you with the background in blue, and this time we see you happy, smiling, and thank you.
Thank you, Helmut. It was a pleasure exchanging with you. I'm sorry if my answers were a little long. No, it's good. It's good.
Wonderful.
I enjoy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. All the best to you.